one of the weird things about my career is I started off as a journalist. I know you never think that. And now we live in this age of AI and ChatGPT, and it's pretty weird coming from a background of writing when you suddenly realize that everyone thinks they're a writer. And so I tried it, and I was like, wow, this tool is like really reassuring. It told me that I was really clever. It told me that what I was writing was quite profound. And so I often do talks on this, and I often speak about this when it comes to like my own. I do a lot of sort of speech writing for people, and I hadn't ever thought that same question applies to engineering. And it's kind of embarrassing for me that Hywel came up with this title that immediately caught my attention. In the difference between AI access, we've all got access to ChatGPT, including our bosses, annoyingly, and AI ability. So I'll pass you over to Hywel Carver from Hywel to talk about that subject. Hywel.
Thank you very much, LJ. Hi, everyone. My name's Hywel, as Lee John said. I'm one of the founders of Hywel, and today I'm going to talk, for a nice change, I thought I'd talk about AI. I feel like I need to start by saying sorry, because I know how much you have all heard about AI already, and I don't necessarily want to be adding to that. But I am going to try and talk about it from what I hope is a slightly different angle and give you a different kind of perspective on it. I'm going to talk about why our teams are not seeing all of the promised productivity gains and how you can change that. I'm going to talk about how we improve those AI abilities, not just the fact that they are different to giving people access, but how we make people more able to use this new generation of tools. And also how we measure productivity, I think, is a really important thing as well. Obviously, AI is everywhere now, and one of the things that is fueling the continued interest is some of the big claims around productivity and what we're going to see. Dario Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic. He said in about 6 months, AI is going to write 90% of code. In a year, it could be 100%. For what it's worth, he said this more than 6 months ago now. I think the first half of that has not come to pass, but I guess that doesn't mean that the second half won't happen, just that it hasn't happened yet. For my sins, I've been talking about AI in talks like this one for a few years now. I did a talk a few years ago in California about what I think is a reasonable expectation of the impact we might see from generative AI. And what effect I think it will have on junior developers coming into the industry now. I think it's fair to say that our main area of interest, the main place we expect to be impacted, is in the generation of code. Depending on which study you read, you'll see different fractions for this. A typical developer spends about 26% of their time, writing code, thinking about code, writing code with others. I know Luca's talk said 52 minutes a day. I think that's just on the actual code writing bit. The kind of stuff around that, including coding with others, seems to be how some studies get to 26%. Of course, in a perfect world where AI is perfect at writing code, that time would go to 0, and we would suddenly have this extra gap open in the work of our team for them to do more of the other useful things, I assume useful things, that they are already doing. And so in that world, we might see, I think, a 33% increase in productivity if all the kind of other rate-limiting bits of work expand to fill that time, hopefully communicating more than some of the other activities people do. Then that would mean 33% more productivity. And that's big, right? 33% productivity is a huge thing if we saw that industry-wide. Most people are not seeing 33% increases in productivity. DX's research suggests that an average developer is saving about 4 hours a week if they're using AI, which is still good. That's 10% of people's time, right? I think that's an excellent improvement. Of course, many people aren't seeing even that. That's an average. Why? Why do we have access to these tools that supposedly can make us so much more productive, and yet what we're seeing is very different, more kind of mid results and less of the impressive stats that people are talking about? My view is that AI is in a different category of tools compared to what we are used to. Brief history quiz. Can you put your hand up if you recognize what these things are? Excellent. Does anyone who is younger than me recognize what these things are? I'm 39, by the way. So there is definitely a generational thing here. I think it's hard to find a comparison in tools to AI. These tools are called, this one on the left, this is called a log table or a logarithm table. This thing is called a slide rule that is quite cleverly made. The bits kind of slide past each other. And basically, these are ways of doing hard sums if you don't have a calculator. So you don't need to know much about logarithms and what they are mathematically, but essentially, if you can use logarithms correctly, you can translate a lot of tricky sums into additions. And additions are the kind of things that we know how to do by hand. My son is 7. He can do additions by hand. He knows the rules. So a sum like this, which seems incredibly simple to us today, we would just type that. Heck, I wouldn't even use the calculator for that. I just stick that into Google, and Google tells me the answer. This strikes fear into your heart if you don't have a calculator. Like, even the second half, like doing something to the power of 2.2. I mean, who could do that without a calculator? But if you have a log table or a slide rule, you can translate these numbers into logarithm space. You can do the right additions and get to an answer that will be accurate to like 3 or 4 significant figures. My parents are civil engineers. They studied engineering at university. They were doing that in a time before calculators were commonplace, and this is how they would have done calculations. This is how they did sums. Of course, then the calculator arrived, even before we could have phones or Google to do this stuff for us. We had a new tool, it automated something, and then these old tools died off. But even the log tables, the slide rule, and the calculator have something in common that isn't shared by AI. AI is a different kind of tool. In fact, it goes beyond tool use. I would say it's different to the other phases of industrial revolution that we have seen since the 1700s. The first phase of industrial revolution was about steam power, having manual work be done by machines powered by steam engines. And then over time, those were replaced with electronics, which were then over time replaced with computers. And now, of course, we have the internet as well, which generally those are recognized as the 4 phases of industrial revolution. The common themes here are automation and efficiency. And those are true of AI as well. We get to do more stuff faster with less human input. Excuse me. What's different, though, is that these are very constrained processes that are being automated. Excuse me. In each case, the inputs are well known and understood and constrained. The output that we need to get to is well known and understood and constrained. The process gets accelerated. We get to the output faster from the input, but it's deterministic. We are aiming for a fixed thing. Whether that's the same shoes being made faster on an assembly line, or the same communication arriving faster via the internet, or the same calculations being done faster via a computer. This is not the same in software. In software, there isn't a single well-defined correct bit of code. There are multiple solutions available. When we're writing software, we are often making interesting and difficult trade-offs along the way because of the contextual understanding that we have about the problem we're solving, and the team and the org that we're solving it in, and the industry and the society that we're solving it within. And even when we do have that answer, verifying that it's correct is a hard problem. Someone who makes shoes can look at a shoe that was made by an assembly line and say, this will work as a shoe. That is not always the case with software. It's a hard problem in our industry. So this is an automation that is making decisions for us, that is making trade-offs for us, and is not verifiably correct. And that is why I think this moment is in a different class from previous industrial revolutions. One of the ways that we are set up to fail here, a hazard that we face, is it's very easy to get a false sense of mastery when using AI. My view is that comes because AI occupies this space somewhere between a mechanical tool and a human. Like, if you're using a slide rule, if you're using a calculator, that does not feel natural. You would never confuse that experience with talking to another person. We see those simple tools, we learn the processes for using them, we use them in a kind of deterministic, fixed way. If we follow the rules, we get the right answer. They are correct. And this just isn't true with AI systems. They don't feel like mechanical systems. They almost present in a very human way. We talk about chatting with them. We talk about answering them questions. We talk about the idea that the AI thinks before it responds or it does research. But they obviously don't seem like humans either. They exist in this uncanny valley where we see elements of both in them. They're sort of human, so there's a very low barrier to us interacting with them. You don't need to be taught which buttons to press to make ChatGPT respond to you. You just type in the box and hit enter. And they're kind of machines because they can do all these impressive things automatically without further intervention from us. But they also fail in really stupid ways that humans don't fail in and that most machines don't fail in either. I'm guessing some people here are familiar with the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Goethe poem. It was more for my generation. It was also made into a film by Disney, Fantasia. The plot of the poem is that a wizard leaves his apprentice alone in the workshop to clean the floor, and he goes away for the day. The apprentice decides he's going to solve this problem using magic, which is a tool he doesn't fully control at this point. And so he commands the broom to start washing the floor for him. It washes the floor just fine, but then he can't stop it. And the room starts to flood with water that the broom is kind of generating and spreading everywhere. And so the apprentice, thinking it's going to solve the problem, grabs an axe and says, I'm going to cut this broom in two, and that will stop it sweeping the floor. So he cuts the broom in two, and now he has two brooms that are both autonomously flooding the room for him. Luckily, the master returns to save the day. I hope the parallel is obvious here. It's very easy to start using AI tools because they're so intuitive. But without mastery, there is a risk that you use them very badly and you flood your code bases with rubbish code that other people have to come along and clear up afterwards. Or that you just don't use this tool to the full extent because you heard the story about someone who flooded a room with it, and so now you're scared of going near the kind of magic tool at all. But mastery is possible. We can get good at using these tools, and we can get all of the benefits and avoid all of the downsides. The problem we face is that you only realize that you're not a master when you see someone who's really good, or when you hit these problems yourself and realize that you've now flooded the room. We have another challenge to face here, though. AI tools give us a false sense of productivity. They make us feel more productive than we actually are. This study, a bunch of you might have seen earlier this year. There was a lot of traction about it. It was produced by Meta. Meta, not the Facebook owning Meta, but Meta, it stands for Model Evaluation and Threat Research. They did this study about software developers using tools earlier this year. So this is relatively recent. They gave developers access to AI tools, and then they said to them, how much faster do you, or they asked more neutrally than that, what effect do you think this will have on the time it takes you to complete these coding problems, to solve these, resolve these bugs, add these features, whatever it was? And the developers thought that the effect would be that their time taken was reduced by 24%. That's an average, but 75% of the tasks taken overall would be pretty good. Then the developers did the work, and they were asked what the effect had been. And the developers' perception was that it had reduced the time taken by 20%. Not quite as good as 24%, but still a significant gain. But the study also measured how long it actually took them to do the work. And that time increased by 19%. These tools subvert our expectations so much that we are directionally wrong about whether they are helping us be more productive and get stuff done faster. And this isn't helped by the hype. It isn't helped by the claims of big productivity gains, because those anchor us to expect that we're going to see things get way more productive, that we're going to be able to do all of our work much faster and better. One thing I've noticed is that those claims are often using a metric I find quite surprising, which is this idea of like a fraction of code. Like, measuring productivity has been an ongoing conversation for the last at least 15 years in the software industry, probably longer before that. And my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that everyone has always agreed that lines of code is a really shitty metric for the productivity of software. And I don't know when we all decided that this was okay when we're measuring the impact of AI. Certainly no one asked me. I don't know if anyone asked you. But if you're given the opportunity, I would love it if you could say, that's not a good metric, because it really isn't. Like, different companies are reporting different fractions here, like 20, 30, 40, I think even 60% I've read before. I just don't think we should care. Like, there isn't a version of this metric that is good or interesting or tells us something about productivity. Like, the amount of code is not a good aim anyway. Normally, we want less code. Like, the less code there is, the less maintenance we have to do, the less repetition. Like, a smaller code base is normally a better code base. Is the 20 to 30% here like just all boilerplate that we were previously generating from a YAML file with some like command line tool? Is the 20 to 30% here like a very well thought out, rigorously kind of extensible structure that's going to form the basis of our entire code base? That difference matters. Like, the amount of code tells us literally nothing about the value or the quality of that code. We need a better measure than this, which I will get onto. First, I want to talk about this idea of a true sense of mastery. How do we accurately understand our own abilities, and how do we improve them? I hope I've convinced you that AI is different to other tools, has the same aims, but the fact that it works in such a different way means that it subverts our expectations of how a tool should work. It gives us this false sense of mastery, it gives us a false sense of productivity. But we want real mastery, and we want real productivity, and we want them to be measurable. Firstly, I think we have to acknowledge that this is a skill that we need to improve. We need to improve at using these tools because abilities can be a barrier. Have you ever heard the phrase that a bad laborer blames their tools? I think there's a German equivalent which is like, if the rider is slow, it's the horse's fault. I can't speak German, so translate that and hopefully you'll know what I'm trying to say. Those phrases have a really simple interpretation, right? That there is when the laborer is bad and does a bad job, they don't want to accept the blame, so they say it's all the tool's fault. I see that interpretation. I have a second interpretation that I prefer, which is that maybe the tools aren't perfect, but if you were a good laborer, you would fix your own tools. You would understand your tools. You would work around their imperfections. The bad laborer just doesn't really know how to use the tools, doesn't improve with the tools, and is kind of the victim of their own tools, at least in their eyes. That meta-study got lots of traction when it was released, but maybe you might not have seen that the devs involved actually only had very limited experience at using AI tools. And one of the people who was a subject of the study, who had the most experience, actually saw a 25% reduction in the time taken. The majority of people taking part didn't really know the tools well. They had access, but they didn't have ability, and it slowed them down. But the one person who had experience and the ability to use the tools well got faster. So when there's this false sense of competence, how do we get past it? How do we get good at using these tools? I would say one way that is not the answer is a hack or a quick fix or a shortcut. These kind of tips and tricks, they work very well as clickbait. They go out of date very quickly, and they don't allow for extrapolation and extension. They don't give you a sense of how to go beyond what the tip or trick says. My own view is that software engineers need mental models in order to be able to use their tools and their systems effectively. Like, when you're starting out, it's absolutely acceptable to rely on rules of thumb and tips on tricks. But we typically learn those mental models, and then we kind of forget about the tips and tricks and the rules of thumb because we have a much stronger model to rely on that we can use in all kinds of other ways. We just know better now. Like, you could learn a rule of thumb that accessing a CPU register is faster than accessing RAM, which is faster than accessing disk, which is faster than accessing network. But if you have the mental model, it kind of tells you all of that for free. You know that rule of thumb intuitively from your mental model. And it gives you so much more besides. It makes you a better software engineer if you understand the architecture of like the insides of a computer. You could remember the rule of thumb that you have to authenticate and secure everywhere at every possible level, that you can't rely on the front end alone, you have to defend in depth. But if you have a mental model of the system as a whole, it tells you that rule, and it tells you so much more besides. It helps you write better code, structure it better, and be a better engineer. If you want to get stuff done in your organization, you could remember the rule of thumb that you have to care about the highest paid person's opinion, the HIPPO. I guess everyone's heard of this idea before, the highest paid person's opinion. But if you understand the dynamics of the people around the table, you can get so much more done better. It tells you the rule of thumb and a lot more besides. And I think the same is true with generative AI. Our intuition lets us down when it comes to Gen AI tools, and rules of thumb, I think, are insufficient. Do you know what? When I was writing this, my worst nightmare was that people would come in on this slide and think I meant this seriously. I feel like I should make clear, I think this is bad advice. Don't do this. We need a mental model to avoid a false sense of competence, and that means we need to understand how the systems work. We need to understand tokenization and embeddings and how that affects what we put into an LLM. We need to understand feed-forward networks and attention and how these systems are trained. We need to understand sampling also that we can use these tools well with full knowledge of how they work. That means experience, but it also means theory. Theory together with usage is important. If you just have theory without usage, that's kind of abstract and hard to apply. The theory gets much more interesting and much more useful when you start using it. This is how we gain skills, is by doing the thing. We also need to be able to measure the impact of this, right? Obviously, without lines of code, I think I've made my feelings there quite clear. What better measures are there than lines of code? We have to start with thinking about what outcomes we actually want here. If AI is helping us, then what we should see is developers being brought towards the rational middle. The vibe coders who are just kind of YOLOing things into production and waiting to see what happens. Hopefully we can rein those people in a bit and make them take more individual responsibility for the code that they generate. But also the haters or the skeptics, the people who've seen some bad outcomes or bad outputs from LLM-based tools, hopefully we can show them that there really is value there and that they can be a better engineer and do stuff faster if they can use the tools well. But of course, ultimately, what we want is productivity. We want to ship more stuff and do it better than we did before. Those productivity measures should be our ultimate aim. Everything else, the usage of the tools, the good usage of the tools, are just steps on the road towards improved productivity. This is something that we are actively trying to demonstrate at SkillAware. This is not just an idea. We want to prove the impact of generative AI and its impact on real productivity with real engineering metrics in real engineering teams, and to prove the impact of mastery of those tools, not just having access to using them, but being good at using them. And so that's why we're partnering with DX at the moment. We're creating a study where we're going to measure the impact of being good at using AI tools in engineering and measure the impact on actual productivity metrics that teams already care about. Broadly, we think that person in the meta study who knew the tools had more ability and more experience and therefore was faster, we think that's a repeatable thing that we should look for. We think that you need AI ability, not just access to tools, and I think the meta study kind of demonstrates that. And we want to prove it. We want to prove it with numbers. And we're going to be reporting on the results of this study at the CTO Craft Con in London in November. Between then and now, we're running a program with teams. This is a program designed for software engineers, designed by software engineers who are allergic to hype, people who are not AI boosters and influencers, but people who want to find the real kind of valuable use cases and isolate those. It looks like 6 90-minute sessions that are thorough but also practical, that cover theory and also how to evaluate LLMs, the internal structure and how they're trained and how they're sampled and what that tells us about how to prompt them well. It covers how to manage context when you're using them to write code, using agents, failure modes, how to integrate them into products safely using MCP and building RAG systems and things like that. All of which is about growing understanding and ultimately accelerating people's experience so that they get to that high ability stage, that productive stage, faster. That's not going to happen with lectures or clickbait articles. That happens with these hands-on micro workshops where people apply theory and then discuss with an expert in small groups. We know a load of people are already comfortable with at least some aspects of LLMs, so we're doing an assessment first to make sure that people only attend sessions that are genuinely going to be useful for them individually, and we're holding ourselves accountable. We're going to report back on what we find in November. If you are interested in being involved, we are running this study in 2 groups with very deep discounts for the people and the teams involved. So we want to get the largest pool possible here, honestly, to make the results as convincing as possible. If you want to take part, come and find us at the stand out there. We also have a grant on offer through CTO Craft. So if you need to demonstrate the impact of learning and what it does for your productivity before you can get budget, the grant is designed to help with exactly that case. So if you're interested in those things or just generally upskilling, do come and talk to us outside. But in the meantime, thank you all for your attention, and I will see you at the stand.
Thank you. Thanks, Hal. We are out of time. Yeah. Thank you, buddy.